What's new in C# 10? In this section, we'll look at some of the new features introduced in C# 10 language. Also, we are going to go through each of these features and then start applying to our new project or some of the existing projects that we had developed before. Before we proceed, let's look at some of the topics we are going to cover in this section. First, we'll look at what are the set of constructs that has been introduced in C# 10 that allows you to have a simplified .NET development scope. Next, we'll look at global using directives that is completely new for C# 10. Using this, you can have those using namespaces at the global juncture so that you can avoid repeating these in each of the files. Similarly, they have introduced file scope namespaces wherein you can declare the namespace at the top, thereby reducing the indentations of all your codes. We'll cover that more in this section. Moreover, there have been some enhancements for the record type wherein they are going to support struct along with the class types. Similarly, there has been some enhancements done for the struct type to make it a more seamless experience along with the class types. Also, they have done changes to the constant interpolated strings that is going to allow you to have some of the variables that is also going to be a constant strings. We'll cover that more in this lecture. Finally, my favorite part is the introduction of DateOnly and TimeOnly types. In the past, you used to use datetime for both date as well as the time representations. However, with these two new types, you can use only the date or you can have only the time. Let's get started with the first topic, namely Simplified .NET Development. Simplified .NET Development. In this lecture, we'll look at some of the enhancements done in C# 10 by Microsoft that allows you to have a simplified .NET development experience. The main objective of is to have a minimal way to get started for those newly onboarding persons. If they are coming from different fields or from different experience level, they want to make it easier for them to get started with C# programming. Let's see some of the changes made to support the minimalistic way to get started. Microsoft has implemented feedback that has been received from many programmers coming from various different fields. Based on these feedbacks, they have improved all the coding constructs to make them develop at a faster rate. This helps them to develop the applications more easily by getting started with a minimal set of coding constructs. They achieve this by removing some of the common ones like using namespaces and the namespace declarations, classes, the main methods, and so on. Hence, when you create a new project, then you are not going to get all these like the way we used to see before. Just need to do the main coding that is required as per your business logic. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and if you expand the new project that you have created before, if you open program.cs, it is extremely surprising to see that it just got a single line of code. Anyone who have worked with C# can readily see that all the previous statements such as the using namespaces, default program class, the default main method, all this has been removed. You just have the main code as per your business logic. So in this example, the one which is created by the .NET New Console is going to have a single line that prints hello world. This is just the beginning. From the forthcoming lectures, you will know the various new and advanced features that has been introduced in C# 10. Let's see that next. Next, let's look at global using directives. Global using lets you to specify the directive just once and apply it to all files within the assembly. To understand more, let's pick some of the project that has been worked on before and we'll try to convert them using the global using directives. For this, I'm going to consider one of the project that I have used for web API development. So for this, I'm going to my GitHub, github.com/CodeWithPraveen. I go to repositories. Let me pick one of the project, say ASP.NET Core Web API. Here I have got two projects, namely cms.data.repository and cms.webapi. As the name tells, this project is going to be a class library that deals with the databases using Entity Framework, and cms.webapi is a web API project type in ASP.NET Core, wherein it is used to expose the API endpoints. But do not worry if in case you do not know about web APIs. That's okay. The main intention here is to pick one of the projects that we have developed before and try to enhance that using the C# 10 features. Hence, do not worry in case you do not understand about these projects or the web API concepts. You just focus on the newly introduced C# concepts that is being added to these projects. So let me go to code and then download them. I'm going to grab these two. Then go to my Finder and then paste it here. Alright, so now we have got these two projects here. As you can see, now it's going to give some errors. The reason being I do not have .NET 5 installed in this machine. I have only .NET 6 and hence it's not able to find the .NET 5 references. It's okay, we are going to correct all these mistakes. To begin with, to understand about the global using statements or the directives, just see how we have been using in the past. Here you can see that for each of the files we have a set of using statements. It can be either the .NET directives or it can be those that have been defined by us. So in this example, anything starts with CMS is the custom namespaces that is defined by me. If you go to any of the files, all the files are going to contain at least one namespace. This has been the norm for years. Right, so you have all this. So here you had controllers, DTOs, mappers, and corresponding program and startup files. So each has its own files. Now using the global using, what you can do is you can move all these using statements into a single location and have a global scope, which means the scope is at the entire project level. Hence, if you define, for instance, using system.link at a single place using global, then it will no need to be repeating at multiple places. To do this, you create a new file called globalUsings.cs and then go to one of the projects and then copy here. One point here is that you no need to create a separate file like globalUsings.cs. You can use any of the existing files and then use to denote the global usings as well. But I strongly recommend you to move it to a single file so that it is easier for you to look as well as manage. To make it a global scope, C# 10 has got a new keyword called global. So once you do this, then this is going to be applied or applicable for all the files within the current scope, which means our current assembly. So to do this for all, let's go to each of these files and then I'm going to remove it and then add it to the global usings. Let me go to each of these files. We have got the mappers. Of course, there are going to be some duplicates, you can remove it. Alright, we just have one more controller. Okay, so now we have removed or deleted all the using statements from each of the files and moved to a single location. You need to now prefix all these with global. So do this, I'm going to do a find and replace. Let me use it to replace using with global using. Let me do at one shot. Of course, since we already done, it's going to show repetition. Okay, still it's going to give us error. The reason being it still points to .NET 5.0. To make it compatible with 6.0, you change the moniker from net 5.0 to 6.0. So this is going to target .NET 6 framework. And then there are going to be some duplicates that you can remove, or you can use this okay. Now it has removed all the duplicates. Okay, once you do this, we have a clean set of global statements that you can be used in any of the files. Looks like we have got some mistakes. Let's go and correct it. So here we have not removed. Let's remove it from here. Let's make sure it's not duplicated. Okay, and then let's go to controller. This looks fine. I think we have now done a restore, so let's do that. Then it should be okay. Okay, it's not able to find open API info. Looks like when you had used the remove unnecessary strings using this option, it has removed one of the namespace by mistake. Okay, let's go to this file. Okay, this is in startup.cs. So let's get back to our GitHub, web API, startup.cs. Let's look at the namespaces. Okay, so here we have got multiple, and it has removed for one of the namespace that has been used by that specific code. So in startup.cs, we can see error is related to OpenAPI info. So if I am not wrong, this is going to be in this namespace, Microsoft.openapi.models. Let's make it global. Now build the project. Okay, this looks fine now. Looks like this is getting repeated. Yes, so we can remove this. Now with this, you can see that we have created a global usings.cs file and moved all the using statements to a single file. Once it is done, then any of the CS files no need to have these namespaces. It makes your code a lot cleaner. You look at here, we don't have any namespaces. That's good. Hence, if you have any existing projects, if you are going to target .NET 6.0, then I recommend you to move all these namespaces here so that you can tidy up your code to a better extent. Moreover, there is another concept introduced in C# 10, namely implicit global usings. This means that when .NET supports these global usings, it also knows that for some of the common structures that has been introduced by them, like the system-related APIs, it knows which namespace they belong to. For example, if you have console.writeline, it is introduced by .NET. It's a .NET API. So .NET knows to which namespace it belongs to. So in that case, we no need to include those statements as well. For instance, we have got the using system. So now since this is part of the usual .NET framework, you can consider to remove this. The application should still work fine. The reason being, whenever there is any usage of the APIs that belongs to the system namespace, it's going to implicitly consider that using statement. What I suggest you is to have all the namespaces here and let .NET take care of it. Hence, I'm going to leave all these system namespaces as it is. Whenever I'm going to create a new project using .NET new command, then .NET takes care of not adding those system related namespaces. I'm going to follow the same. For existing ones, you just group them into a single file. It can even include the systems. That's still okay. For any new projects, anyway, .NET is going to take care of ignoring those system.related namespaces. The reason being, not all system namespaces can be removed. Only those that are supported by .NET as per a specific project type can be removed. To avoid this confusion, I suggest to let it as it is. Next, let's look at some of the enhancements that has been done for the record type in C# 10. Before, we used to use a record type by declaring it without any specifiers. In such cases, it is considered as the class type. For example, if you go to cms.repository, the models, if I pick course.cs, I have it as a class. Let's say I want to consider this as a record, then the way it used to be is to have public record followed by the type. .NET used to implicitly consider this as public record class. With C# 10, among the improvements made, the first improvement is to have the class type explicitly mentioned here. So this is allowed here. Yes, of course, it's very a small change, but the main intention of having this change is the next point. With C# 10, you can use the record along with a struct type. So this means that you can also define something like record struct. This is used to denote the value types for the record. So both the class as well as the struct type can be referred if you are going to use with the record type. If you are going to mention struct, then it's going to be struct type. If it is a class, then it's going to be of type class. In case if you do not specify anything, then it again falls back to the same class type. In short, from C# 10, you can have the record type used to denote class, struct, or even read-only structs. This way, it allows the record to be a reference type as well as the value types. For instance, for the same, or say we go to the student type, and let me make it as record followed by struct. So this is going to be the record struct type. You can also mark it as read-only. If you do this, then it means that all the properties can have only init set. It means that it cannot be set randomly, it has to be set only during object initializations. Hence, you need to convert all the set statements to init statements. So depending upon your requirement, you may consider to use read-only record types or just the record types. So for now, I'm going to undo these changes and make it record class or just class type for now. Next, let's cover file scoped namespaces. What does it mean? File scope namespaces enables you to declare the namespace for a whole file without nesting the remaining contents in the curly brackets. For example, if you go again to cms.web API, let's pick, say, simply startup.cs. Now here we have got cms.web API, and we have opened, once its namespace is declared, we use curly brackets, and all this code that follows is going to be within the namespace. If you notice, there are, say, 4 spaces, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Yes, so there are 4 spaces for each tab and the indentations. So it means that just to denote that all these code are in the same namespace, it's going to prefix with 4 spaces for the entire file. This is going to be the norm, and this is going to be the way it was there for so many years. Any CS file is going to contain a namespace at the top, and all the code is going to follow. It's really a waste of space, in about 4 spaces for each of the lines. Any typical enterprise project is going to contain hundreds and thousands of CS files, and if it's going to contain all these spaces, then it's going to unnecessarily indent your code. To make it easier, with C# 10, you can have file scope namespaces. The concept is very simple. Instead of repeating here, you can just have inline namespace by ending with a semicolon, and then you can just remove these brackets. And then you can, for entire source code, you can just remove the indentation so that it becomes more cleaner. Now this makes more sense, right? Means this entire file is going to contain namespace cms.webapi.controllers. Once we have done this declaration, then you can remove the brackets so that the unnecessary 4 spaced indentation can be removed. Similarly, you can do for all the classes. Although it looks a very small change, personally I feel it's in the good direction because it's going to make your code a lot easier to see and manage. Especially even the indentation or the set of statement increases a lot. Looks like we have missed it here. Let's see whether it's a duplicate. Yes, it's a duplicate. Let's remove it. Okay, so we are in the student DTO. Let's make it file scoped. Let me grab all this and then remove one indentation. You just need to do it once. So let's make it here. All right. As you can see, by removing the using namespaces and moving them to global, as well as having the file scope namespaces, your code is really getting better. In short, you are removing the clutter by shrinking the code horizontally, because for each of the lines you have reduced 4 spaces. That's good. Next, let's look at some of the enhancements made to the struct type. Before we look at some of the changes made to this, we will see how to use with a simple struct in a C# application. Then we can see what are the enhancements made on top of it so that you understand the real difference between these two. So to create a struct, let's go to any of the DTOs. Let's say we can pick the student DTO. For simplicity, I'm just going to grab only a couple of properties. We'll go to our demo project, program.cs. Let's remove this for now. Okay, so here we have got a simple class. Let's make it struct. All right. So with this, we have a simple struct that contains an integer and a string property. So with this, in case if you want to print anything, then before that, let's make student DTO, student equals, and then when we try to print this, let's say we'll print student details with student ID followed by student first name. Okay, let's see what happens if you print this. So before that, let's initialize this. Student first name equals, say, Praveen. Student let's see, just 100. Okay, so this is one way of assigning and printing it. Looks like we have got an error. Top level statements must precede namespace and type declaration. This is due to the .NET 6 feature wherein we used the top level statement. Like we had all these statements. So if you are going to have any definitions, that has to occur at a later point. So these top level statements should appear first. Okay, so now if I go and execute this, then we should be able to get the values. .NET run. Alright, so we have got 100 and value being Praveen. Now with .NET 6, what we have got is it allows you to have property initializers. So if you go to the definition of a student DTO, we have got the list of properties defined. Instead of having the default values set in the constructor or in the values after the initialization, you can directly do the initialization of property here. So let's say student ID, the default value you want to give is just a 0. And similarly, the first name you want to make it like empty always. So this makes sense if you want to have a set of default values. So in this case, if I'm going to remove this and then rerun the application, you should be able to see the value as a 0 and blank. So the reason being, now it is going to pick the values as defined in the default initialization of properties. Next, with .NET 6 and then C# 10, in the case of struct, it allows you to create instance parameterless constructor. So with this, you can go ahead and create a constructor. Let's say public student. It does not accept any arguments. So the same initialization you can do over here. Student ID equals 0 and then the first name equals. So once it is done, then you can go ahead and remove this. So now if you try to execute, then it's going to give you the same set of values, 0 and string.empty, that has been coming from the parameterless constructor defined over here. Let's say I want to make the default as 100 and the first name as just say student or say no name. Now let's see what happens. So it's going to print 100 and no name. That comes from this constructor. Now just remember that there is a default property like you can access in the way like student equals, okay, let me comment it out for easier reference for you, and then let's make it student DTO student equals default. Once you have defined the way using the default, then it's going to pick only the default value of the value types. So in this case we have got student ID of type int, hence its default value is going to be 0. In the first name is of type string, hence the default value of string type is string.empty. Hence if you use default, it's still going to create an instance of the student DTO struct with those default values. Let's see what happens. So we have got the values 0 and empty. Instead, if you try to use new like student DTO student equals new, let me comment it out. Then in this case, it's going to trigger the new parameter list constructor that we have defined here. Looks like we missed certain parentheses. Once we do this, then in this case, it's going to create a new instance of student DTO and it's going to trigger this parameterless constructor that was defined over here. Now, if we go and run the application, then it's going to trigger this and give the values as 100 and no name. Next, let's look at another enhancement done to the interpolated strings. With C# 10, you are allowed to have constant interpolated strings. This means that in the past, the interpolated strings doesn't allow the constant variables. Whereas from C# 10, you can start referring to those constant variables if your interpolated string is declared as const. Again, let's check that with an example. So for now, let me make it everything as part of region, struct enhancements. Alright, so next let's go on and do some of the constant variables. Let's say I want to have weekdays and weekends represented, then I'm going to have constant string, say Monday equals Monday as a constant string. Similarly, I can have something like Tuesday equals, okay, again we are doing the same mistake. Let's go and add to the top. Okay, now we have got a couple of constant string variables. Let's next create a const interpolated string. So in this case, let me create it as say weekdays equals, let me create with Monday and Tuesday. This is just for an example. So shortly we'll look at what is the main difference between these two. Of course, we are going to get some error because we are going to mix up with the styles, top level statements. So to make it more clear, I'm going to move this into a separate class so that we can have a proper segregation. Let's say types. Alright, now this looks fine. Looks like I have mixed up again. Okay, so we have got Monday and Tuesday as a types, and then I have created an interpolated string that contains Monday and Tuesday. So look at that. Here I have got const string. So it means that I'm going to create an interpolated string of type const that refers the value which is again a const string. So this is perfectly allowed in the case of C# 10. Now if you go and print to the console, then you should be able to see the value as per the expected values. Weekdays. Here we have got the values Monday and Tuesday printed. So this way you can concatenate even those constant string types to form constant interpolated strings. What the compiler does is it does its own compiler level optimizations for these interpolated string usages. One point to note here is that in the case of creating these constant interpolated strings, the variable that is referred to must be of type constring. You cannot have any other variable types. For instance, let's say I am going to declare const int and say number of days. This is an integer of type const, but you cannot use it over here. For example, let me make it as number of days. So if you can see here, it's going to give you an error. The expression being assigned to weekdays must be constant. Although the number of days variable is of type const, since it is of type integer, it is not allowed. You must have it of type string. Next, let's look at one of the cool features of C#10, namely the introduction of DateOnly and TimeOnly types. In the past, whenever you want to refer to any date or just time, we were forced to use the datetime type. With the introduction of C#10, it supports DateOnly and TimeOnly types. As the name tells, the DateOnly is going to represent only the date component of the datetime type. Similarly, the TimeOnly type is going to refer to only the time of the datetime component. This is extremely beneficial when you want to represent only the date or the time for various classes or structs. This way, it is very easier for you to interpret or even convert the values from string to dates or times whenever you want to convert them. For instance, let's go and see how it works with C#10. Let's say I want to pick the current date time and then print only its date using the date only and the time using time only. So for this, I'm going to create datetime now. So this is going to give us a current time. So before we used to have something like, if you print this, then it's going to give us only the date time in the complete format. So it's going to give both date as well as the time. Let's say what happens, I want only the date. We used to do something like now.date and then apply various operators on top of it. So with C#10, you can have something like date only. So once you do this, then you need to use date only dot from datetime. So with this, you can pass any of the instance of the datetime variable. So in this case, we have got now as a variable, then you can pass it here. So what it's going to do is, it's going to pick this datetime value, and then from this, it's going to pick only the date component. Let's see what happens now. As you can see, you have got only the date. So this is one way of using the date only. Of course, in case you want to create the date by yourself, then you can do so. For example, new year equals, you want to create a new instance of date only directly with some of the values that you want to pass, then you can create just like any other variables. Say 2022, month and date. So this is going to represent again the date only type. So let's see what happens. So here you can see only the date component, that is the current date, and this is going to be the one that we formed ourselves. Just like date only, you can also have time only. So for this, you need to use time only. So I want to say get the current time, then just like we did over here, we need to have time only dot from datetime. And then you can pass any datetime values. Time only. Before printing it, let's see how you can create instance of time only by yourself. This is going to be extremely similar to that of how we have seen before. Say I want to create a alarm time, I want to mention it. So wake up time equals new time only. I get up at 7, so let's make it 7 a.m. One point here is, if you see in here, it's going to represent in 24 hours format. Hence, if you want to represent the time like 11 p.m., then you need to give it as 23. So I am going to represent as 7 a.m. hence I'm giving as 7. Then let's print this and then look at the value for both. Wake up time. Alright, let's clear this up. Okay, so here we have got only the time component 9:35 as of this recording, and then we can see the time that we have created ourselves. So using this date only and time only is going to be extremely beneficial for you. You then might be wondering when to use these types. Why not use just the date time? The date only type is beneficial when you want to represent like birthdays, anniversary days, business days, creation days, and so on, where the time component doesn't matter at all. Before it used to contain like 00 or any default values, but with this date only you can represent these with accurate date values. Similarly, the time can be make sense for those scenarios that represents or targets only the time, wherein the date doesn't matter. For example, recurring meetings, alarm clocks, business hours, and so on. So for these types, you need to know only the time component. In such cases, you can represent them using the time only type. When it comes to the SQL Server types, the date only corresponds to date type and the time only corresponds to time type. Moreover, you don't need to include any of the additional namespaces to refer to these types. The reason being, the date only and time only are part of the system namespace, which is available by default when you create any .NET 6 applications.